Uh, this is just delightful. I don't know exactly why, but this brings me just a lot of pleasure being able to talk with all of you today. Um, I was trying to think of what would be a way to describe how much joy this brings me, but it's kind of like sitting down to a great meal. I don't know what's going to be served exactly, but I know it's a good chef, and I just have all my senses are open. Uh, it's a chance to explore. So I really appreciate the invitation from Scobie Roshi to meet with this group and to talk. And you're going to hear about butterflies, and you're going to hear about swords, and you're going to hear about the TV show called The Bear. Uh, this is just a topic that just pulls out a lot of different threads for me. I think that's what makes it so much fun. Um, for those of you who don't know me, I see many familiar faces, obviously, but there's folks that I don't recognize, and I enjoy the chance to see you in your tiny little screen, and I'm in a little screen. But I look forward to a chance when we can actually be together. That's a more satisfying encounter. But my name is Gordon Greene. I live in a very rural part of southwestern Wisconsin. Where I live, we call it the Spring Green Dojo, which is the rural training center for Chosei Zen. And there's several times a year when we host intense training events here called sesshin. But then there's a lot of ad hoc events that come up here as well. So there's plenty of ways to welcome you here. It's you're going to hear my age sort of come out in this talk. But I was reflecting, January 1970 was when I first sat Zazen. It kind of blows my mind that I've lived this long to be able to say that. But what that gives me is just decades of exploration, blind alleys, moments of blazing insight, times of great frustration and despair. So that's kind of all of me who's sitting here with you today. Well, we got this topic called Kamae. And occasionally you'll see me looking to my left because I've got a set of notes that would like to follow, but we'll see how well I've got this embedded in me already. I very much doubt you'll hear me talking for an hour and a half. That would be a problem if I did. I know we've got an hour and a half on the clock if we wanted, but I would like to save some things, but then also invite you guys into the conversation. That just feels healthier to me. So let me start with a scene, something that happened about a week ago, and I want to pose that as an image of something that I hope will start to make sense the more I recount what I have to say about the word Kamae, a Japanese word. So we were traveling, my wife Patricia and I, and part of that we had to get a highway bus down to the Chicago airport, and we get down there, and we had our luggage tucked under the cargo area of the bus, and so we get to the Union Station, downtown Chicago, and we get off the bus, and we're stepping to the side for the driver to, pull our luggage out from underneath, which he does. And as I often do, I handed him a couple dollars, as a tip. What stood out was that without missing a beat, as he's pulling other bags out, as he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a little wrapped mint and hands it to me. And I was suddenly back at Chozenji in Honolulu many decades ago doing kendo, where there is something that happens without a break in between. Those of you who've read Fudochi, there's a place where they talk about the clap and the sound issues force. And there's a Japanese phrase, sonomama, just as it is. Clap, and there's a sound. And that was my encounter with this guy hauling out the luggage and handing me a candy as I handed him a couple dollars. It was an uncanny flashback that had something to do with the quality of the encounter. It wasn't him, it wasn't me. Something happened between us. So let's take this word Kamae. And certainly those of you who've done any martial arts, Japanese martial arts, would more than likely know this word. I've had it from decades of training in Aikido and then training in Kendo and training in Hojo. And the way it is most often translated when somebody wants to put it into English is that it is a psychophysical posture, a psychophysical posture. So there's something about there's an attitude to it, but there's also a position, a posture to it. And I don't know if you know the movies of Kurosawa, but there's a classic black and white film called The Seven Samurai. And I was preparing this talk, I was flashing back to a scene with two swordsmen, and it's a duel. And the one guy, he takes his sword, they're facing each other, right? This guy. And this guy over here lets his sword sort of sweep back to his side, down and to the right. He's holding his sword there. He's just waiting. He's just waiting. He's just waiting. He's just waiting. And the other swordsman, the guy who had challenged him to this duel, he can't contain himself. He can't sustain the same degree of, let's call it, calm in his position. And so he rushes forward finally with what he thinks is a killing blow. And instead, he's the one who gets sliced and killed. So to me, that's sort of a classic sword kamae, a certain position, a certain way of being as you hold that position, and there you go. And so certainly in my own sword training, I was trained with, okay, so here's one kind of way of holding a sword when you face someone. And then there's other ways to hold that sword when facing someone. And there's a third way to hold that sword when you face someone. But it was always based on my psychosocial posture. That was my starting point. It was something that I was. At a certain point, somebody suggested that if I really wanted to develop my kamae with a sword, that I face these big calligraphies that surrounded the walls of the dojo there in Hawaii. These were done on 4x8 sheets of plywood by Omori Sogen, who was the founder of the temple in Hawaii, and prior to becoming a Zen priest and master, he was a swordsman, classic Japanese swordsman trained in the early 20th century. And it was a fascinating experience. You take a kamae facing that calligraphy, and you feel a certain kind of intensity. You feel the need to adjust how you face that. It's not conscious. It's not like there's a thought running through your head as to what you need to do. Change your finger, change your grip, change this, change your breathing. You are just confronted with something that feels like, wow, I really need to be ready for this encounter. That's fascinating to me. And we can talk at length, maybe at another time, about how is it that a piece of Zen art has that impact on someone who encounters it. You can experience that from calligraphy. You can experience that from ceramics. Those are the two most immediate areas. You can experience that when someone is blowing a shakuhachi. But somehow about something in the encounter changes you physically, breath and posture, it changes. So that was sort of a next bit of evolution in my sense of what is Kamae. It has something to do with the encounter. It's not just a solitary gesture in space. So there came a period of time where I was still living in Hawaii, but my colleague here in Madison, Ken Kushner, most of you know him, was teaching at the medical school, teaching in family medicine. And I can't say exactly how or when it emerged from me, but I wanted to create an experience for people that I called therapeutic stance, because I was starting to experience how you face someone changes both individuals based on that positioning myself with Omori Sogen's calligraphy. So therapeutic stance became a workshop, and Ken was willing to join in the fun, and we created this and we offered it several times in Madison. I would fly over from Honolulu, and we were working with these family physicians in a variety of settings, usually over 2 or 3 days at least, using swords in a way that we wanted to kind of wake up a deeper sense of how they encounter someone or how someone encounters them, that how you stand, how you breathe, how you appear before someone can have a therapeutic impact. That was the premise of this workshop. It was one of those delightful things where nobody told us we couldn't do it. Nothing to lose, so let's just do this. And we found people willing to engage, and we did. But there was this one memorable time when we are paired up during this therapeutic stance workshop. And we would sometimes you can use a light sword, like a bamboo sword from Kendo, or you can use a heavier wooden sword called a bukdo from the Hojo practice. And for whatever reason, I was using a bukdo. And I'm facing a woman who I don't think I had met before, but she was one of the participants, and we were both holding these bukdo. And I don't think she had any prior experience with sword training. She just was willing to, okay, this is what we're doing. We engaged. So here we are, each of us with our swords facing each other. And there's a certain sort of pattern movement that you can do when you do, there's a kata, is a Japanese word that comes out of the Hojo old sword training movement. And so somehow we were doing, the first few steps of that kata. which is something I had done hundreds, if not thousands of times in my previous training. So it was a very familiar thing for me. So here I am experiencing this, and here she is, the ultimate beginner. And it was there was how to describe it? A phase lock. There was something where suddenly we were bound together. She was, I don't know, 20 feet away, and there was a sensation below my belly button, the area we called the hara, the Japanese, where there was a sensation like there was a bungee cord, and there was one end attached to her body below her belly button, and then the other end of the bungee cord was attached to me below my belly button. And the proof of that sense of attachment was that I could just do the slightest of twist in my hips as I moved, and it would create a similar shift in her body. And likewise, she could make a movement in her body. She would step back and I would feel pulled, or she would step to the right and I would feel pulled to the right. And I had never had that sensation in all the thousands of times that I had done this sword kata. But we were just, And from that moment, it's like, okay, Kamae is not something that I'm doing. Kamae is something that happens in an encounter. You can't isolate it and call it a psychophysical posture. That to me disappeared as a meaningful phrase or concept. Instead, Kamae to me became relationship. Okay, relationship. So I shift to the notes here. So here's where you're going to understand a bit of my age. Let's talk about relationship. I grew up in a small town, northern Illinois, surrounded by cornfields, public high school. But for whatever reason, you know how high school you can have languages, language class, and I doubt this exists in many places in U.S. education anymore. But I took Latin. I had my 4 years of high school were 4 years of training in Latin. Somehow it delights me to think that was possible in a public school, kind of in the middle of nowhere, nothing fancy about anything. But my mom had always suggested, I think your best grounding in language would be to take Latin. So I did. So there's times when I go back and when I want to look at a word, I want to look at its roots. And kind of on a whim, I said, well, let's take a look at relationship. And yeah, sure enough, as many of our words do, it has Latin roots. And you can look at it in two ways. This is a Google search, not a Latin dictionary search. But there was one word, which is a noun, relationem. And the English translation of that was a bringing back or restoring. Or there's a verb. There's a verb form called, in which it's I want to do it sort of in a French accent. I've lost my Latin accent, but it was referere. And there's all the grammar that goes along in those when you learn other languages. So I've forgotten what a past participle is, but just in case you're interested, the past participle of refare is relatus. That's the way Latin shifts from a verb into a past participle, relatus. And again, that the translation there is to bring back or to bear back, bear in the sense of carry, bearing weight. And what I like about that is that in both senses, this bringing back was what I encountered with that bungee cord, is that I was restored to the let's just say the true state of being, is that this woman and I were connected, right? We were connected. And that was not, I mean, to me, it was like a revelation, but in reality, it was a restoration of how things actually are. And I could feel it in my body. It was, this is not a thought that was going on. It was a physical sensation. This is how we are. I can either say meant to be, but even that doesn't do it justice. It's like simply that is how we are. And it completely changed my sword training from then on. That sensation of this is happening intimately together. Another way to translate or sort of the phrase now that I use for relationship is that we are not alone. we think it's in our language, it's in our culture, it's in our education that I am this individual that resides within my skin, and that's the unit of action, that's the unit of identity, that's the unit of meaning, is me inside my skin. And as I'm recalling, feeling back to this sword encounter, it's like, that's false. That's an illusion. That's a product of language, culture, all those things. So if we are not alone, how do we in a Zen context or a life context, how do we train to restore this? Well, what is you're hearing a good story, and it's like, I trust you believe my description of this encounter and this realization. But let's shift it to a training context. How is it that we foster, develop, create the conditions in any of us for this to come about? It strikes me that there's two, I call them arenas in which this is possible. So I'm going to talk about one arena and then the other arena, and it's an artificial distinction, but this is how I sort of have been piecing this part. I like to be practical with this stuff. It's like, how can you train in this? So I started with this, you heard the phrase therapeutic stance, that somehow it was just an intuitive understanding that came early on in my sword training that somehow there can be a therapeutic element to an encounter between two human beings. Good in theory. I mean, I trusted that, I understood that, but it was kind of, let's just say, untested until I moved to Wisconsin and set up the Spring Greene dojo that we have now. But we moved here without any kind of predetermined sources of income, and so it sort of was kind of a what do you call it, hard scrabble time. in my family's life, as we had to sort of patch together enough income to do what we wanted to do. And so my wife was out hunting down jobs at restaurants, and I was scrambling for all kinds of things. But when I hit upon, I said, well, why don't I try being a chaplain? Because I'd been a medical educator in Hawaii. I'm a Buddhist priest. Somehow I should be able to put those two things into work as a chaplain. And yep, sure enough, I was able to talk myself into a position where suddenly I'm a hospital chaplain. And I'm dealing with people in some pretty extreme conditions. All you got to do is watch, a doctor show on TV, and there's the ER, and there's the the drama and the sudden this and the sudden that, and most of the people in the TV shows have got things they can do. They've got procedures to do. Stat. Let's get IV drip and 2 milligrams of this and this. Right. So there's all that kind of doing going on. But a chaplain, I don't think I've ever seen a chaplain in one of these TV dramas. But a chaplain, you don't have things you get to do, and yet you are there to provide something. Not always described what it is you're meant to provide, but you're facing suffering. And that became a phrase that sort of galvanized much of my life for several decades. What is the means by which we face suffering? It was a deeper absorption than sort of a therapeutic stance. Therapeutic stance was sort of theoretical. Somehow this encounter can be therapeutic. But it's not so much with the anguished father or the anguished family. The little kid in the ER terrified because they don't know what's going on and there's all this strange stuff happening. Now it's what's therapeutic sort of disappears as a notion. It's just, how is it I can face this suffering and be with it? Hospital setting, you're going to encounter people who are dying, people who are just dead. A chaplain sees way more people dying and dead than a physician in this day and age. Chaplains are like the death specialists. So there's a lot of that. So there's facing death. One version of that I can describe was a man who was in the regular ward of the hospital, not in the ER. He'd been there several days. It was toward the end of the day, and I was sort of making my rounds as you do, kind of see who's not been seen, seeing what's going on, see what's needed. And I step into the room with this guy, and my introduction is something along the lines of, my name's Gordon. I'm hospital chaplain on duty tonight. I just stopped by to see how you're doing. And this is an older guy. He looks at me lying in his bed and he says, I don't need no stinking priest. And for whatever reason, that didn't bother me. That wasn't like a trigger phrase that got to me. And so I just sort of stood quietly for a moment, and then I just said, well, what's going on? And he said, well, I'm not dead. I tried, and I blew it. I didn't actually know how to kill myself, and so they found me and they brought me here, and now they're trying to get me straightened out. But I can tell you that all I want to do is be healthy enough to walk out of here because now I actually know what to do to kill myself. So I just need to be well enough to leave here so I can go kill myself. And again, it was one of these kind of uncanny encounters, one of these times in my life where something shifted. I had no overt training for, okay, what do you do with a suicide? You know, um, so I just said, I sort of pulled up a chair and said something like, "Well, tell you what, let's be dead together. Tell me what it's like when you're out there killing yourself. Can you take me there?" And he did. He started talking, and he started talking in a way that was just very raw, not emotional, but just stripped of emotion, stripped of any pretense, stripped of anything. It's just like the sensation was we were just kind of sitting on this edge of a cliff, and he already is fully prepped to just push off down the cliff, and he's got me there with him in a way that, if he goes, I go. So that was an experience of a Kamae with death, facing death. A lot of times as a chaplain, you're facing people with loss. They've lost the ability to imagine 20 more years of life. They've been given a diagnosis of something that's probably going to kill them within the next 6 months. Whoa. I mean, some of you have been through those kinds of scares where whatever you thought was true about sort of the trajectory of your life, cut off at the knees. That's a loss. So how do you face that? How do you face that in someone? So in all these things, this idea of facing suffering, facing death, facing loss, could be facing anger, could be facing despair. That was like a training arena for me where it was just patently obvious. The only tools that I had of any use were my breath and my posture. Things not so unfamiliar to you as you're sitting on your cushion. That if I wanted to be in that room with somebody facing death, I had to do something in my breath and my posture so that I could be there with them. And I could feel as visceral as me with a sword and Omori Sogen's calligraphy. It could be as visceral as me and that woman with a bungee cord between us as we're moving around a crowded room. Having had those experiences, I knew I needed something. I needed to be visceral in the encounter. So the training was, what do I got to do? The breath and my posture. That became the Kamae. And it was again, going for that phase lock. Now, I don't really know what a phase lock is, but somehow that's the word that's coming to me. Something that's been like this suddenly becomes synchronized, inseparable. Okay, that's what I'm calling phase lock. So for a Zen priest, the phrase that goes along with that is to become one with. And to be honest, I forget the Japanese phrase at the moment, but I don't forget the translation, that the work of a Zen priest is to become one with. That's not in your imagination. That's not in your thinking. That's in the whole bodily experience of being with someone that suddenly, as you might imagine, to be one with, you can't really separate who's who. You don't have a need to separate who's who. It's like somehow what's true at the moment is this. Okay, you with me so far? I'm getting into this, and it's hard for me to read your faces when they're so wonderfully tiny. But let me just pause for a moment here. Does anybody want to speak up before I sort of continue on in my run down the hill? Again, that's a classic Zen phrase. And I guess what I find true about my Zen training is that you can hear a phrase like that, and then your job is to find it. Okay, for someone, sometime, somewhere, that must have been their visceral experience of the world. Okay, go find it. Go find that to be true. And until you find it to be true, it's just a phrase. So we point to things that were experiences throughout the history of Zen training. And our job is to find it, make it real. Yeah, so thanks, Paul. Anything else anybody wants to bring up at the moment? I'm going to shift to a different arena. Let's see. I mean, my Zen training began, age 20? And I can't point to a significant loss before that. So any sense of loss is sort of in my more adult life, which I realize may not help you. So let me turn the question back to you. Where does this question come from? What is it you're looking for in your question? Yeah. Yeah. That's big. I'm sorry. I mean, what you're describing feels very natural in the sense that there's a pain. And there's a time, to me, in my life experience, when pain is followed by a kind of numbness. You know, you numb the pain. Numbing the pain is not a bad thing. It's a self-preservation thing. And then with time, the numbness wears off. And now there's a chance to kind of encounter the pain in ways you couldn't when it first happened. So that's as you're describing this, what happened with you and your friend is just, it's like it feels like that. Um, Certainly, I don't think of Zen as being um, something you slap onto a wound to heal it. Uh, Zen is something that trains you with some tools that you can bring to bear as life unfolds and you start to find your breath and you start to feel the air on your skin and you start to feel sensations of life that you lost for a while. And this is kind of an intimate conversation. I don't mean to necessarily pursue this in a group, but I guess I simply can say that as my sensation based on what you just described. Yeah, it's not a small thing. Well, and you've kind of changed the room with your story. I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, Time check. Wow. Okay. So I'm going to shift out of that arena of facing suffering, which is one that was so meaningful. There was nothing conscious in me of saying, oh, okay, I got to learn more about Kamae, to learn more about relationship. You know, I got to be a hospital chaplain. It's just like experiences start to wake up things that maybe came earlier in your life that you didn't recognize what they were or how they were. Like I said, I'd been schooled in the formality of Kamae with a sword or in a stance from Aikido, but that's all it was. This was it, coming more alive. But this other arena, I don't have good vocabulary for it, but it's certainly one that my own Zen teacher, Tenoi Roshi, embodied. And what I call it is training with everyday attention to detail. That doesn't do it justice, but that's what I've got as a starting point. And what it means is that you treat everything as Kamae. That everything is based on relationship. It's not like, oh, I'm in the hospital now and this woman's father just died and so I got to deal with it. And then my shift is over, I shake it off, shed a tear, get in the car, go home, have a nice meal. Right? That there was, that was a context in which I was in a Kamae with that woman whose father just died. But it wasn't like a moment by moment commitment to every damn thing that's happening. Right? Now, it was part of my travel this past week was on a train, overnight train from Chicago out to Denver. And I know when you've last been on a train, we had a sleeping quarters, but it was sleeping quarters without a bathroom. So there was like let's call it a public bathroom on a train. And it's a little bit like on an airplane. You're on an airplane for 12 hours. Those bathrooms can get a little bit nasty, right? And so the phrase, the sensation that came to me, I think at some point I pulled out a paper towel, having washed my hands, and just the way those towels are sometimes packed in there, I pulled out a towel, an extra paper towel came out and fell on the floor. And there was this moment of, God, do I want to pick that up? Or can I just leave that? The floor is kind of nasty already. There's been a lot of people in here. There's stuff on the floor I don't really want to encounter. Can I just kind of leave it be? And because that thought was going through my mind, it's like, no, I can't leave it be. I have to pick it up. And I did. Or the other version of that is, especially like on an airplane or these sinks. You have these tiny little sinks and you got this tiny little faucet and you're trying to wash your hands. And so water is splashing, outside the sink. And again, there's this sensation, well, can I just leave that? Is it okay? I mean, there was water when I came to this sink. So I just added some water to it. Can I just say, yeah, it's not my problem. And again, once you have that thought, it's like, okay, no, I can't just leave that water. I gotta get a paper towel and I gotta dry off the sink. And there's kind of this grumbling going on. It's like, yeah, how come I gotta do this? The people before me didn't do it. People after me sure as hell aren't gonna do it. So all I'm doing is just creating a nice sink for the next person to come in here. I'm guessing you've all gone through that kind of internal dialogue. But when I talk about paying attention to every detail, it's as if you do that often enough that everything you encounter is meant to be encountered in the correct way. Of course, you pick up something that you dropped. Of course, you clean up a mess that you make. It's like it's not even a internal debate going on. It's just like, of course. Now, who the hell ever trains themselves 24 hours a day with that kind of attention? Roshi was the first person I'd ever encountered where that was true. I'd never seen, and it wasn't like he was picky, and it wasn't like he was anally retentive or, obsessive compulsive or whatever the phrase is. It's just like everything was done in a way that felt appropriate. No more, no less. No more, no less. And he said that was consciously from his martial arts training, that, he was only in the dojo for any X number of hours per day or per week. And if he wanted to derive anything meaningful from that training, he had to take it outside the dojo. So if you're paying attention to, if anybody's trained with a sword, a lot about your left little finger. That's a big deal. What's going on in your left little finger when you're holding a sword. So of course, you're in the dojo, you're holding a sword. You're really focused as you need to be on that left little finger. But for him, it's like, well, if that's something that's got to be attended to in a dojo setting, outside the dojo setting, what is the equivalent in any given moment as to what's needed. So that's how he did it. So I was thinking about how to bring this alive for any of us. And that's where we got to deal with the bear. And I guess throw up a hand if you've seen that TV series, especially season 2. I see some people, not many. Well, let me just start off by saying highly recommended. Highly recommended. And I'll say it again, highly recommended. Because what it is it's a story of a Italian beef. I won't even call it a restaurant. It's an Italian beef shop in Chicago. And if you know anything about Chicago, Italian beef is kind of a big deal. It's kind of like the indigenous cuisine of Chicago, even more so than like deep dish pizza. Deep dish pizza, who cares? No, it's Italian beef. Okay, so here's a guy whose brother, I guess he committed suicide, but his brother ran an Italian beef shop, and against all odds, he left it to his brother. And his brother had also been involved in food, and actually he was at this incredibly famous restaurant in Copenhagen, in Denmark, as one of their chefs. And this is Michelin star, ump-de-ump, world ranking restaurant, Noma, a real restaurant. But he's given this restaurant, as his brother dies, he comes back to Chicago to deal with the aftermath of his brother's death, and he's got this restaurant, Italian beef. And there's the all kinds of characters involved in this restaurant. They've been doing this for years. They've been slinging the beef, and somebody comes to the counter and they want double this and double that, and okay, put on some extra this, and okay, yeah, and okay, and the buns come out and they do this and they slap on the sauce, and it's like, okay, they've been doing this, they know what they're doing. And here comes this fancy ass chef who shows up, and he says, okay, we'll start with this. Let's see what's going on. Let's see what we can do. But his goal is to create his own Michelin-starred restaurant. Now, when I say it like that, it's like, what a, only in TV do you start with an Italian beef shop, in a bust-up neighborhood in Chicago and say, yeah, I'm gonna make a Michelin-star restaurant. But the acting, the screenwriting, whatever they did to create this show is so damn good that you get swept up into it. And it's like, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't you do that? So in this show, they are showing sort of the evolution of attention to detail. Every detail counts. That had not been true when they were doing their Italian beef stuff. But because this guy, I guess Carmelo, because that had been his experience as a chef at this restaurant in Denmark, it's in his body. He knows what life is like in a kitchen where every detail counts. So for him, it's just kind of a, here we go. Trains left the station. Here we go. But for the other folks working with him, they don't have that experience of working in a Michelin-starred restaurant. So they get sort of caught up in the slipstream. And his cousin Richie is not really going along with the plan here. It's like Richie had been like the manager for the Italian beef thing going on. And Richie's been bust up by life, and he's got, a kid, but a divorce, and he's just got kind of this angry persona where everything he encounters is like nobody's quite good enough. And that just means they're not doing it his way. And therefore he's pissed off. So Richie is not, he's not with the plan here. He's not going with the plan. Until Richie gets shipped off to another restaurant. There's sort of a tradition in restaurants of the chefs where if you want to get good, you can't just stay where you are trying to get better what you do. You go and train with somebody who's like really good at what they do. And you go sort of encounter how they run a kitchen, how they present dishes, how they attend to the wine. And so that's part of season 2 where people are kind of shift off to other settings where they're encountering a higher standard than what they are used to. And so Richie has to go through this kind of revelation where suddenly he gets it. And the phrase that comes alive for him is not that, every details matter. The phrase that comes alive for him is that every second counts. And it's just sort of the genius of the writing and the acting that you see how true that is for Richie, where every second counts. And that's what I'm describing in my own teacher. Every second counts. Wow. It's uncanny to experience someone going through that and having that realization. But I want to push this a little bit farther, because many of you who've been around us for a while, you know how we talk about Zen and we talk about the ways, capital W, English translation of the Tao. And we teach various forms of the ways. You can do it in martial arts. You can do it with music. You can do it with cooking. You can do it with flowers. You can do it with tea. You can do it with archery. You can do it with all kinds of things. But I find that people sometimes get confused about the relationship between Zen and the ways. And sticking with the bear for a moment, we can describe this, where to have that kind of experience that is full body realization that every second counts, as depicted in the bear, that's within a context. That's within the context of running a restaurant, of serving in a restaurant, of dealing with guests. But it's only in that context. You take off your suit, you go home, you take a shower, you sit down, you sit in front of TV, you pop a beer, and it's no longer the same. Every second counts. So the ways is a place where you can train to have a contextual realization. And to me, it's a very highly useful stage in any of our training. You need to be in a setting where you get it. It's like, okay, yeah, I get that. Interpenetration without obstruction. Yeah, I get that. Attention to every detail. Yeah, I get that. Every second counts. Yeah, I get that. But Zen forces you to go beyond that. It's like that's not enough because it's contextually bound. It has to be as true as the air going in and out of your lungs. You don't have to think about it. It's not like me figuring out whether I'm going to pick up that paper towel off the floor or not. It's like, obviously, it's just like the next encounter. So that's where I go back to my guy who's unloading my luggage, where it's like the clap and the sound, the tip and the piece of wrapped candy. If you weren't there, if that wasn't you, there's nothing I can do to convince you that was a highly magnificent human encounter. But because it stands out against the whole panoply of life experience, that was a transcendent moment. That was a true Kamae, because it was a true relationship. It was a clap and a sound with nothing interfering with it. So I wanted to end by talking a little bit about this sensation of what does it mean to sort of get outside of your own skin, that you're no longer bound. Like we started by saying a Kamae is a psychophysical posture, meaning something that I do. It's a way I hold my sword. It's a way I control my breath. It's a way I look. It's a way of this. It's a way of this. It's all me, me, me. What does it mean when that drops away? And again, this is part of this recent trip where it's like, okay, yeah, I get that. This is in Boulder, Colorado. It's cold. They had a big snowfall. I'm with my son and his family, which includes an 18-month-old daughter. And it's like, okay, let's go to the butterfly pavilion. There's a butterfly pavilion in Boulder. And you go, and it is it's like a tropical greenhouse. There's all this incredible lush plants, and I'm used to like botanical gardens like that, where you can go in the wintertime and there's palm trees and there's things that are flowering and there's just this magnificent scents, and obviously the warmth and the humidity, that contrast on a very dry, humidity, cold day, right? So there's that. But at the same time, there's all these butterflies just everywhere, just flying around. And I sat on a bench just to kind of, soak in a little bit of this butterfly thing and trying to make sense of their motion. It's like, well, how do butterflies do this? Are they aware of each other? Because they're just going all over the place. And it suddenly strikes me that the problem is that I'm watching butterflies from a point in space. So here is my point in space, and here's this butterfly, and I'm reading its motion against a background. So because I'm a point in space and it's going from here to here, it's like, duh, it's moving, right? And it's moving in a way that's different from this butterfly, which is coming from up here and going like this. And these butterflies, which are coming like this, right? So all these different motions, and I'm observing them from a point. But if I dissolve that point, there's no movement, right? There's no fixed point of reference with an I and a thing and a background, right? I was trying to resolve the sense of movement in that room, and I couldn't do it consciously, but suddenly it just fell away, in which there was just branches, flowers, trees, and butterflies. And it's like nothing is moving. But if they weren't they weren't seemingly in relation. Like if you watch a flock of starlings, at dusk, how magnificently they fly together, right? There's just this sort of organic sensation. But there was none of that with the butterflies. Every butterfly was seemingly doing its own thing. But if that was true, every butterfly was doing its own thing, then who was I? And I'm struggling with this one. I can't recreate it for you easily. I wish we could all be there together. but it was one of those bungee cord moments where all I can say is that there was no movement. And that's what feels like the difference between an awareness within a context versus an awareness that is available anytime, any place, any moment, no matter what the setting is. I didn't bring my Zen training into that butterfly pavilion. I didn't bring my sword training into that butterfly pavilion. I just brought me. So Kamae has nothing to do with you as an individual. Kamae only is meaningful as relationship. And it can be a profound encounter that you can remember decades later, but it also can be just a profound acceptance that that's what's true in any given moment. If every second counts, every second is a Kamae. So to train for that, go out and create a Michelin-starred restaurant or the equivalent, whoever you are, whatever you're doing. You've hit a, for most of us, you get past 35, you get past 40, you kind of got your stuff together for the most part, right? So you hit an okay identity. You hit an okay way of being. You hit an okay way of encountering the world. That's you, that's me, that's any of us is an Italian beef takeout place. If you want to somehow find what I'm describing for every second counts, there has to be something that takes you way beyond what's true today. So I didn't say it at the opening of this, but sort of one of my training techniques is that, okay, I'm gonna give this talk. And who I am by the end of this talk should be very different than who I was at the start of this talk. Because if I try to carry that sense of identity from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. or whatever time it is now, I have avoided everything else that's available in every of those seconds that have passed since I started talking. So you have to find your own training method. I've described some of mine, but one of them that I'm saying that I find the most useful is that who I am at this point is not the same as who I am at this point. And to allow that to happen. That's the end of my notes. Yeah. What's happening? What's true for you at the moment? No, I mean, obviously it brings a smile. I know there's a particular language and theological tradition around grace in a Christian context, which I cannot speak to. So I don't know where grace comes into my own experience other than just as a recognition of it. And I think, I was labeling my encounter with this bus driver handing me a piece of candy as I was handing him a tip as a, relationship in Kamae. But actually, your words better. It was a moment of grace. And it stood out from all the other background of that day as a moment of grace. So I guess what I would say, that was not so much that I had anything to do with the conditions, but there was a openness to it happening. And it wasn't like a conscious, oh, I got to get off this bus and be ready for my encounter with this bus driver. It's just like there was just a receptivity to the moment. And I hear that in you as you head out. There's an openness in you to that which you encounter. And I use the word openness deliberately, as it's meaning opening to what's beyond my skin, what's open beyond my sense of identity. So I don't know. I don't know if that speaks directly to your comment, other than just, I love your use of the word grace. It's a good word. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for speaking as you have. I mean, we could go so many places with that. For me as well, becoming vulnerable was a really scary thing. It's like it took away every sense of power, every sense of authority, every sense of control, every sense of, how I dealt with the world. My sword training had its limitations that I can't point to transcendent in my sword work. But there is a kamae with a Japanese phrase attached to it. And the translation is that you're open on all sides. And it's considered sort of in some ways, the most profound experience of kamae and swordsmanship, where you have no protection against anything, which sounds really stupid for a swordsman, who is liable to have a life and death encounter. And then here the language becomes highly inadequate, but the reason it works is that there no longer is a self holding a sword. So to be an open on all sides means ultimately is that there's no one there to be killed. There's no one there to wield a sword. And that's what makes it transcendent. Sort of another version of this is that, I'm sure any of us who've done martial arts, and people think of martial arts, especially in a North American context, as learning self-defense. And as soon as you say that, it's kind of obvious that the best self-defense is to have no self. So somehow vulnerability is a very profound part of that. Great comment. I really hope some of you go off and figure out how to watch The Bear. Um, what I did, I'm a cheap bastard. You can get a free subscription to Hulu for a month, and if you cancel before the month is up, you don't get charged. So I think currently Hulu is the only place you can see The Bear, but a month's time is enough time to actually watch it. And you do actually have to watch season one before you watch season two to give it all the full context, but you will not be disappointed. It's a bit challenging, especially some of the early episodes are highly chaotic. You got to be ready for a lot of shouting, a lot of family drama, um, but it sort of sets the stage for some genuine transformative experiences. So Heather, thanks. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I'm glad you guys are. I'm guessing most of you are up on the 40-day challenge. Um, the veterans to the experience. I see newcomers to the experience. None of you are wasting your time. I have a great respect for how it is you're training. I'm grateful that you would show up today because without you, I would not have sort of peeled off the layers of meaning that I peeled off as I was prepping for this talk. That's one of the delights of teaching is that you find out things you didn't know you knew. So adios.